Welcome to Democratic Television, a program of the Santa Clara County Democratic Party that brings insights, perspectives, and attitudes of our always thoughtful Democratic guests. Our focus today is on local government and law enforcement, and our guest is John Hirokawa, our endorsed candidate for Santa Clara County Sheriff. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Bill.
It's great to see you and to speak with you on the show.
I appreciate the opportunity to talk to the Democratic Party.
Wonderful. So our viewers often are very interested in learning from public figures and candidates a little bit about their life and what may have brought them to public service. And so where did things start for you? Are you a native Californian?
Native Californian, born and raised. Grew up in San Francisco, where my parents had met after World War II. I'm third generation. That's also known as Sansei.
Wow.
My grandparents and the families were both interned after Pearl Harbor. On the maternal side, my mother, they had a thriving business in LA, but lost their property, stripped of the constitutional rights, and sent off to Manzanar. My father's and my grandparents on my father's side had a little different. My father had a little bit of a different tour there. They had a farm in Watsonville, sharecropping, lost that.
Wow.
Family was sent to Tule Lake. My father happened to be drafted pre-December 7th, 41.
Wow.
And was in the United States Army when Pearl Harbor happened. He was then thrown in the stockade.
Wow.
And they were questioning him about his loyalty and why he was in the Army, and he had to remind them that you drafted me.
Right, exactly.
But eventually, they formed a Japanese-American regiment called the 442nd, and that's where many of the Japanese-Americans, including men from the Hawaiian Islands, were in this regiment. They were the most highly decorated unit in the European theater. My father lost his left leg in Sicily.
Wow.
But because of that event, he could no longer farm.
Wow.
And then they retrained him, the government retrained him to be an accountant.
Wow.
He chose to go to the Presidio Fort in San Francisco. My mother getting out of camp.
No, he chose to go to the Presidio Fort. He's still in the Army at this point?
He passed away quite a bit. But he started his accounting 25 years right after the war at the Presidio.
Wow.
And from there, that's why he was in San Francisco. My mother, getting out of Manzanar, went to college, became an X-ray technician, could not find work in the LA area, and then moved to San Francisco because a gracious radiologist offered her a job.
Wow.
But then they met up in San Francisco at a First Presbyterian Japanese church. It's still there in Japantown in San Francisco.
Wow.
And that's their story to me was, if it wasn't for the war, if it wasn't for the internment, my dad losing his left leg, my brother and I may not have been born. Wow,
it's a lot of unusual level of randomness and fate.
Right.
So your dad, when he was in the Army, did he have family back in the U.S. who were interned at the same time?
At Tule Lake.
Wow, that must have been really hard for them.
It was, but as with the other Japanese American men who were serving in that 442nd, most of them, I would say almost all of them, their families were interned.
Wow. And
had been stripped of their constitutional rights. And that's why, growing up in San Francisco, their heartfelt inspiration to me was this message. Because of the severe discrimination they faced during the war and after the war, World War II, that not to judge people based on their race, color of their skin, religion, socioeconomics, sexual orientation, as I was growing up in San Francisco.
Right.
And from there, that was their not to listen to the fear-mongering, and judge people on their individuality. And that's my concern right now today in regards to how immigrant groups, especially people who've immigrated to this country, whether documented or undocumented, the fear-mongering about how they are destroying our country, because this country was built on strong immigration.
Certainly.
And so from there...
so your experience in San Francisco, it sounds like that would be easily a very profoundly formative experience for both of your parents, as for a generation of Americans, the Depression would have been. Did their experience of the war and internment and going through that experience of World War II as Japanese Americans have a strong influence on them that was that you perceived and experienced in your family life?
I think so. I think that although especially both my parents really never talked about the discriminations they really faced, and especially my mom spending time in the Manzanar camp, they kept on stressing the fact that can't allow this to happen again. Do not condone this type of behavior.
Right.
Think for yourself. Think of people as individuals, not as groups. And so, you know, in the 60s and 70s, growing up in San Francisco was a different time.
Tumultuous time, right? Yes.
And but it was interesting, you know, as a young Asian male in the city, there were Chinese gang wars at the time in the 70s, and we didn't call it wasn't called profiling back then. But my young youth, you try to emulate and dress like everybody else in the Asian community, but we were being stopped, my friends and I, quite a bit. Again, it wasn't called profiling by SFPD, it was just being stopped. And my father was a lot more conservative. When I would come home, he would say, I would complain. We weren't doing anything wrong.
Right.
And my father would say, well, then why don't you go get a haircut?
Wow.
Well, why don't you come home earlier? Why don't you come home before 8? My mother then also told me what are you going to do about it? How are you going to change things? And then I started taking administrative justice programs, went to San Jose State, and graduated from there, and then got recruited by the sheriff's office. And for me, that's kind of the person I try to be. I was very lucky that both my parents tried to instill the rule of law and to be my own person in regards to the decisions I was making, in regards to how I then carried myself through my law enforcement career, which was over 37 years with the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office. Wow.
I'd like to hear a lot more about that, but I'm just curious, how did you end up in San Jose? Was was our good fortune at Santa Clara County? Was that just the typical college thing where you applied to programs and went to the one that seemed the best fit for you?
Well, for me, as I was graduating in that May, June, there were quite a few recruiters on campus.
Right.
Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office being one, San Jose, quite a few others. So I applied to all of them. Moved back home to San Francisco, was doing summer jobs. When I got a letter, pretty quick, I think September of the same summer, and congratulating that they were offering me a job. Now again, my father, growing up in the Depression, said, congratulations, you got a job. And being a youth, not knowing much at that point, I wanted to see what other offers I would get because the other departments were paying more. Right. My father said, nope, congratulations, you got a job. I've helped you out. It's time for you to be on your own.
They gave you a kick out of the nest, pretty good.
When you get offered a job, get offered a job, you take it. Right. And, you know, hey, it's worked out for me. Right. 37 years with the sheriff's office, you know, from working in the jails as a deputy, sergeant, also worked in the jails, patrol.
John, what was the very first thing you did? Was it as in the jails or on patrol?
So first academy, first tour, 4 to 5 years in the Santa Clara County jails. Wow. Okay, then from there, from patrol. Yeah. Now
as a young officer, that must have been an interesting experience. Is that what you expected to doing police work?
Well, you know, never had thought about working in the jails. When they were recruiting us, they said we would be spending a minimum time, like 18 months in the jails. Right. But that turned into 5 years because they were short jail deputies. Yes. But I think that it was a good training ground for, let's just say, a kid's fresh out of college. Right. To be in the jails, directing, supervising inmates in dorms of 60, and only by your verbal direction trying to get compliance. And I think that's where I learned those tools early on working those jails were invaluable for me throughout my career, but specifically out in street patrol, where I spent about 10 years in patrol.
In the jail, is there anything that surprised you about that experience that you learned about people or yourself that you didn't expect?
So, you know, many people don't have the opportunity to spend time in the jails.
Very much true.
So, at one end or the other. And it was for me trying to understanding that a lot of people who are in custody are there based on circumstance. They made some bad decisions.
Right.
Many of them, I would say the significant number, the majority of them, are there for that because of that bad decision or because of their environment. Mm-hmm. But they are good people. Right. They just made a mistake, and now they're going to be held accountable for that. Mm-hmm. I'm going to have to, when inmates went after me, mm-hmm. The majority of the times actually was the other inmates that helped me out. Right. And so you kind of learn that, working in that, and then you learn that they have, many of them, I would say about over 80% of them, given the right circumstances, the right opportunity, jobs, housing, mm-hmm. can turn their life around. Yeah. And that's what I learned in the jails. And I believe the majority of the men and women who work in those jails and spend significant time, who get to know those inmates, understand that. And that's why I think I want to go in there and make those changes, mm-hmm. to make sure that resonates throughout the entire department, whether they're on street patrol or in the jails.
Wow. So in your work in the jails and in your work as a patrol officer, I'm always struck by those who've served for a long time in law enforcement and seem to, as you seem to have, retained a more or less positive outlook on human nature and society. How do you maintain that? Because aren't you kind of going from interaction to interaction of people kind of more or less at their worst moment and showing their worst?
Sure. And, especially, working on both in the jails and out in the street, it was the main purpose for joining up in the first place. So how am I going to make a difference? Now, for young recruits, I was a training officer, instructor, mentor. What you try to instill in them that you're not going to change the world, mm-hmm. but every contact you may have can impact that person. Whether it's a senior person in their home who maybe some kids egged their house and now they want to report it, that may be their first contact with law enforcement. Mm-hmm. And how we interact with that person or how we're interacting with the person we're actually taking to jail can impact them for the rest of their lives. Mm-hmm. And so for me, that's where I kept that positive attitude, because I think I got into the job for the right reasons, mm-hmm. that I wanted to make a difference. I think as I moved up through the ranks, and you have a little bit more of an impact, as you do it, now have influence on the, let's just say, junior people in the department, as you're doing those trainings and instructions. And just lead by example. And I think that's what's been missing currently in the current administration, leading by example.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for so much you've shared so far. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll talk about some of your service and management at the department and your candidacy and what you hope to achieve as sheriff.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi. My name is Steve Preminger. I'm a longtime Democratic Party and community activist. Donald Trump is our president. I know that doesn't sound good, but it's true. This is the time for all Democrats and other people in our community to come together to form an alliance like we haven't seen here in Santa Clara County. We don't know what's going to come down from the Trump administration. Based on his campaigns, it can't be good. The local Democratic Party is the antidote. They're developing an alliance of community and other activists, and they need you to join. Give them a call at 408-445-9500.
So we're back with John Hirokawa, who's our endorsed Democratic Party candidate for Santa Clara County Sheriff. John, thanks for sharing so much in the first segment of our show about your background and your early service in the Sheriff's Department. So tell me again, how many years did you serve in the department before you retired?
A little over 37 years.
Wow.
In Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office.
Wow, 37 years. That's a long time. And I'm struck by the fact, well, first of all, some people live a whole life and don't have a marriage that lasts 37 years. That's quite a commitment. So congratulations for that. But in Silicon Valley, in Santa Clara County, in San Jose, it occurs to me that there must have been a lot of transformation in the community in the time that you were policing the community in various capacities. Did you experience that, kind of growing as an officer and into a leader during that time?
There's been a lot of changes in the valley and in this county. Mm-hmm. I think law enforcement has come quite a bit away too, mm-hmm. but I believe that the Sheriff's Office needs also to move forward and progress, especially with independent oversight. And that's what I'm trying to instill is I want to restore the trust and the transparency and the reforms to the office. And because of the changes, I think that the Sheriff's Office has fallen behind, especially use of force, and being transparent to the community, which builds trust.
Right.
And with those three, it has interconnected. And a lot, I believe, that oversight is at the forefront for me in regards to keeping that community trust, because at any time a law enforcement agency in a split second, in one decision, one incident, can lose that trust, and then it would take years again to build it back up.
So what's an example in the use of force? Is that a matter of policy or training or kind of leadership and culture and attitude, or really a combination of all of that? What would you do to change that and bring that more up to date?
It is a combination of all those things. Staying abreast of what's happening nationally and within the state. With use of force alone, you could see where agencies in California have changed their use of force policy out in the street in regards to ensuring that the deputy or officer is exhausting all reasonable steps before using deadly force. And you could see that now. The concern would be now there's legislation. I think it's AB 931 that's coming forward. And I think law enforcement in general are concerned about legislation that would force them to do this, but it should be welcomed in regards to how those steps should be considered prior to using deadly force. Now, at any time, you have to skip steps, and that should be also understood. But then, when you have oversight, and that independent body, separate from the sheriff, examines those operational policies and what steps were taken, whether they were reasonable or not, or whether those steps could have been skipped. That's why you just instill that trust with the community. But I believe we've fallen behind on several different policies in regards to this.
As to transparency and in particular oversight, that would present some challenges, I'm sure. As sheriff, how could that be a resource to you? What's the structure of a program that has adequate independence and yet would have the confidence of you as sheriff and of the deputies, of the folks working in the jail?
Well, for me, it's not so much of I don't see it as a challenge. I see it as a welcome in regards to instilling, again, that trust to the community. I believe that the parties should all be at the table as equal to form how that will look. Now, the Board of Supervisors have moved forward with their plan, but what the public needs to know, or what the constituents need to know, is that those 4 board members cannot force any issue or any policy on the elected sheriff. That elected sheriff is a chief executive officer. That's why this campaign, this office is very important, should be important to them. It is a chief executive. The sheriff sets policy.
So you mentioned a pretty important point to me as chairman of the Democratic Party, which I think is helpful for people in the community to learn and understand. That is that the Board of Supervisors is able to set some policy. I assume that they set some budgetary choices at a high level. But the ultimate accountability for the sheriff is really directly to the voters. Is that accurate?
The voters to the sheriff.
Right.
And the board cannot dictate to the sheriff what to do. Now, you did mention budgetary. They can control that budget, but once they give her the money, or he the money, then it's up to the sheriff to decide how to spend the money and can change the mind, change their mind.
So we as Democrats are hoping for a change in leadership in the Sheriff's Department, but I think it's helpful for voters to know that the only way that can be affected is by electing you as sheriff. So that's our goal as a party for sure.
And I'd like to also mention that you had somewhat of an independent evaluation of the jails through the Santa Clara County Blue Ribbon Commission after the death of Michael Tyree in August of 2015. And that Blue Ribbon Commission came up with a recommendation, one of the change in leadership. However, I have the chair of the Blue Ribbon Commission and many other commissioners who are actually endorsing me, who believe through this process I was the most transparent, trustworthy person,
right,
and listening to what their concerns were.
So you referred to the death of Michael Tyree, and can you say just a little bit for viewers who may not know what occurred? And I know that the details of it would be disturbing, but what occurred and why is it important, and how does it relate to your decision to run to be sheriff?
Well, I think the true message of what happened to Michael Tyree, who was beat up by three correctional deputies
right.
of the sheriff, were held accountable and were convicted of murder and are now serving 15 to life. Mm-hmm. But the lessons to be learned here would be, how are the mentally ill inmates in our custody, and for me also out of custody, out in our community, how are they being treated and how are we addressing this issue? Mm-hmm. And through that death, what I recognized also before the death of Michael Tyree, that the department had fell behind in regards to the policies, procedures, in regards to how we were dealing with the mentally ill inmates in our jail. Mm-hmm. And those corrections are being made today. I led some of those before I left in 2016. Mm-hmm. But the lessons learned were, there's no absolving the three deputies that beat him to death. What prompted them to do this egregious behavior and how they happened to get hired is all, it's unexcusable.
Right. So I think that it's hard for lay people, non-law enforcement personnel, to understand how anything like that could happen. There's a whole series of events, and it seems like there were opportunities when, if any one deputy or employee who became aware of the situation might have been able to intervene. And I guess for a lot of us who are looking at your race and the situation with the current sheriff, we wonder what could be going on in terms of the culture and the overall leadership that might have created a situation where there was not an opportunity, not a procedure, nobody in place who might have seen what was going on, known that it was wrong, and intervened. And what would you say about that? Is that part of what you feel is your motivation to run for sheriff and try to change the leadership there?
My motivation is really to change the cultural. Mm-hmm. The culture of your office starts at the very top, the chief executive, the sheriff. And that's what I'm trying to change. Mm-hmm. And then it resonates to below, and then it resonates to the community and what's happening in the jail. Right. It all starts at the top. Mm-hmm. But beyond that, let's talk about, I believe also, so the sheriff took over operational control on July 1st, 2010 mm-hmm. of the jails, and because of the recession at that time, and there were budget cuts to be made, and that's why the sheriff merged with the Department of Corrections, mm-hmm. But there was about a $7.58 million budget cut. But from that came a cutting of personnel, and specifically for me, supervisors. Mm-hmm. So I'm not saying that it may have contributed to the death of Michael Tyree mm-hmm. because of the lack of supervision within the jail. And so that came out through the studies from the Blue Ribbon and right. other people coming into the jail to examine these things, mm-hmm. Many of who I brought in outside medical experts to include mental health, suicide, dental, mm-hmm. medical. And so with that, I wanted an independent evaluation. Mm-hmm. And from that, we learned. But again, those are contributing factors, but it's still the three are ultimately responsible for the death of Michael Tyree.
Right. So you mentioned your long service in the department, and just in terms of qualification, can you tell listeners about the leadership roles you had in the department and how you feel they may have prepared you for this role of sheriff? Because voters, it's one of the offices where voters feel not well prepared to make the decisions mm-hmm. based on qualifications. But maybe just say a bit about what you have done.
I worked most of the major divisions in the sheriff's office. Mm-hmm. Promoted to sergeant, lieutenant, captain, assistant sheriff, under sheriff. Mm-hmm. Held all those positions. At each level, my supervisors or command staff recognized me for my work ethic, initiative, mm-hmm. honesty, integrity. I also have the endorsement. Police chiefs, sitting police chiefs can't endorse, but retired ones can. And so I have about 10 retired police chiefs who worked with me, who have the confidence that I can be that top leader, that I could bring the changes that need to occur in that office. As I said, the Blue Ribbon Commission members, as Crime Victims United, I have a wide assortment of people who've worked in the office who know that I could do a better job. And so for that, I think the public should know, you now have a qualified person who can challenge the incumbent who has been in office for 2 decades.
Right.
And there needs to be a change. I want to bring a fresh start, fresh ideas to the sheriff's office, because the office needs to change, not only culturally, in regards to a lot of the issues that are occurring.
Good. You made reference to to retired police chiefs. What do you see as opportunities as sheriff to be a leader regionally in terms of law enforcement policies, advancing democratic values, advancing progressive values? Well,
I think the majority of those police chiefs are progressive in regards to protecting our immigrant communities, ensuring that their constitutional rights are not being violated. But I believe also there needs to be comprehensive immigration reform to include the protection of DACA and Dreamers, and that we do protect them, because I know that now it's the fear-mongering today in regards to this group. And as a group, we should take a lead in doing that to keep that community trust. And so in order to do our work again, we have to have that community's trust that they are not going to be targeted by federal immigration authorities. So that's what I'm hoping to do. I also want to really challenge the police chiefs in this. There are many unreported domestic violence and sexual assaults, especially on our campuses, college campuses. There needs to be where we reach out to CBOs to protect those victims so they can come forward and report.
Wonderful. Well, it sounds like you will be a great leader in the county and in the Sheriff's Department, John. So best of luck in your campaign.
Thank you very much, Bill. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for watching DTV. Give us a call at 408-445-9500. If you would like to reach out to John Hirokawa or his campaign, please see their website, which is www.johnhirokawa.com. For the party, we're at www.sccdp.org. Help us to make a difference. We will see you on the campaign trail.
KMVT